Well, hey there. So very good to see you. Welcome to the Global Book Network. I am your host, Josh Carey. We have a really intriguing show for you today. I'm joined by our guest, D.W. Duke, who is the author of the book In Search of the Golden Chalice, The Untold Story. And even more so, D.W. is an experienced trial attorney, writer, and noted lecturer. And you're going to see all that he has his hands in quite successfully. It's incredibly intriguing and really very important work as well, as you'll see. DW, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Josh. I'm pleased to be here.
Your ninth book, if I do say, is In Search of the Golden Chalice, The Untold Story, out right now, available wherever you get your books. Can you highlight the overall theme of this book for us?
Sure, I would be glad to. Typically, I write biographical novels, but in this particular case, there was something about West Africa that really intrigued me, and that was the tradition that the people in this particular region are descended from Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. And an empire was built primarily in Ethiopia and Yemen based on this that encompassed over 100 million square miles. I'm sorry, over a million square miles. It was a huge empire called the Solomonic Empire. And the branches of that family were dispersed throughout Africa. And not far from Lagos in Africa is an area called Sungbo. And that is supposedly where the Queen of Sheba is buried. So there's traditions that have in their culture, and what we wanted to do was try to capture the culture as it existed hundreds of years ago. So the book is set in the year 1617, and it involves two princesses and their cousin, a prince, who believe that they're starting out looking for a golden chalice. The golden chalice is the cup that King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba drank from at their wedding. Now, in the Bible that most people know, there's no reference to King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba being married. But throughout Africa and the Middle East, there are numerous writings about this. And they had a son named Ben Sira, who became Prince Menelik I. And he's the one that built the million square mile kingdom. So then his descendants continued throughout the centuries, and ultimately what happened here was the Atlantic slave trade was trying to break into West Africa. They were never able to successfully break in, and that is the one region in Africa where they could never really get into. And they would describe it as being attacked by the jungle. In other words, they were attacked by people, attacked by the jungle, and they said even the snakes and the lions attacked us. Then they couldn't get into that area to build the slave trade. It wasn't until the late 17th century that they finally began to get in, but they never really got a strong foothold. So what we did, we built the story around these two princesses and a prince who believe that they're looking for a chalice when in fact they're being prepared to take on 20,000 troops from Europe and drive them out of East Africa. So that's the essence of the story and what went on in the process of getting there.
Do you have more than 24 hours in your day? How in the world do you, A, have that kind of knowledge? You're on your ninth book. You're a trial attorney. And let me add to the mix, if you don't mind. You're also the president of the Institute for Children's Aid. You're the chairperson of the Human Rights section of the Riverside County Bar Association and the director of legal affairs for 70 Nations Jerusalem, and the CEO of Duke Entertainment Group. What do you say, sir?
I say I'm pretty busy. I'm very active. But that's, some people like that. That's the world that I like to live in.
That keeps you. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Because 9 books don't just happen. Were you always interested in writing and always put pen to paper as you were pursuing a career in law?
I was, yes. Initially, when I was in college, I tried writing my first novel, and it was it wasn't a biographical novel, it was just a fiction. And then as I graduated from law school, I began writing law books. And so I wrote several law books, and they were published having to do with constitutional law, one on medical malpractice, one on insurance, different things. And eventually I said, you know what? Nobody reads these books except lawyers and judges and professors. And I want to write books that people will actually enjoy. So I started writing biographical novels and always with an emphasis toward teaching history and some type of morality. So that's generally what I do. This particular book came out of a process where I was asked to write a book for a large school district on racism and empathy.
Oh, wow.
That's what they wanted me to write. So I finished that book and then began talking with different people from West Africa. And we decided that we wanted to do something that captured the culture and some of the traditions and beliefs of West African people. And so that is how this book emerged.
And I mentioned you are the CEO of Duke Entertainment Group. It's your namesake, of course. So I imagine this is your company. There's a correlation between the entertainment group, which focuses on the motion picture industry, and your books. There's a connection here.
There is, yes. My books are all being they've been written in screenplays as they go. The novels they're written in the screenplays, and we're beginning production of several of those books as well. So the idea is that we will take what's in the books and put them on the screen. So it's easier for people to. A lot of people enjoy movies more than they do reading a book. So this is kind of to capture that audience.
So you have I'm just going to assume you're a successful trial attorney. Let me make that assumption that you're good at what you do. I'm under the impression that attorneys and entertainers, as you also are, clearly in the understanding screenwriting and the creative aspect there, I never really see them intersect. Is that a true assumption and you're an anomaly, or am I making a false assumption altogether?
No, I think that's probably true. You have John Grisham and some other individuals who are attorneys who are writers as well. Typically, they stop practicing law and they just write at that point. And I'm still doing both. I'm practicing law and writing, and I enjoy both worlds.
What is the biggest win for you when you're writing a book? What feels great as you're creating it, as you're publishing it? People are getting, positively affected by it. What do you really love?
Well, I like I like to be able to bring a message across to people. For example, one of my books is about a Jewish resistance fighter in World War II Poland who was just a child. He was only 8 years old when Germany invaded Poland. But his father was a colonel in the Polish army and had taught him how to use the rifle and all of the equipment at a very young age. So by the age of 10, he had become a sniper for the Jewish underground. So what I like to do is just tell what he experienced, his story, how he survived and how his family survived, and then bring across the message, some kind of message of morality. And there, the message is to look at how these hateful situations occur and what can be done to avoid them in the future. So that was kind of the theme of that book. So success for me was when people said, number one, we enjoy the book, and number two, we really get a message from it when we read it.
You're also the president of the Institute for Children's Aid. What exactly
That's
is
correct. That's an organization that does a lot of work with refugee resettlement and does work with the federal government and also adoption work. So what happens there is children are brought to the United States through the immigration process, and we help process them through that whole experience.
Why is that important to you?
Well, because what they're experiencing where they come from is usually a parentless situation. Often they're in persecution. For example, one boy lived in a village where the entire village was wiped out by militants, and he actually survived by hiding in the cesspool and just had his mouth and nose out of the top of the water so he could breathe. This is where these kids come from, that kind of environment. The entire village, his whole family was killed. And so, we were able to bring him here and process him through the whole program. And now he's studying to be an imaging person for hospitals. So he's going to help with radiology technician, that kind of work.
How does something like that make you feel? I'm just on the receiving end of that, and I'm getting the chills, getting choked up. How do you process that for yourself?
Well, it's just something we do. It's important. These people come from a devastated situation, so whatever we can do to help them get into a better place is our objective.
And this is a
Yeah,
theme not only through your days as a trial attorney, but also something you like to put through your writing.
that's correct. That's correct. I try to have all of my, when I'm writing stories or books, I try to have all of them have a message, some kind of message for the public. This particular book, In Search of the Golden Chalice, is about the concept of empathy. And it's teaching part of Africa that the Western world does. The reality is that the history of Africa was suppressed by the Western world. And we can get into the reasons for that, but essentially they would not say what's really going on there. The African people actually were very sophisticated. For example, in this book, one of the key players is King Ajagbo, who was the king of the empire in the 1600s. And he actually developed a parliamentary system of government in that region of West Africa 100 years before Britain had a parliamentary system of government. But we never learn about this in our history books because, again, throughout Europe, the history of Africa was suppressed. And there was an image of African people that European slave traders in the Atlantic slave trade wanted the world to see. And that image was that these people are basically backwood barbarians who kill each other and they're cannibals and all of these terrible part of the culture, which were just warring tribes. That is the image that the Atlantic slave trade wanted to project because they knew that if people realized that these African people were actually advanced kingdoms, college educated, many of them would go to Egypt to study college, then we would study there. They would not be as eager to allow the slave trade to continue, which is the reason I believe that they kept the history of the African people suppressed. But it was actually, there were very many very advanced civilizations in Africa for thousands of years that the Western world has no knowledge of. The Solomonic Empire, for example, was huge. And it was very, very advanced, very sophisticated, many great inventions and things that we just don't know about in the Western world. So part of this is to teach the culture, a little bit of the culture of Africa that is a surprise to most people.
You're also listed as a noted lecturer. How does that play out?
Well, I often give, talks to different groups for various reasons, educated on various topics, real estate law, professional liability, human rights. So I speak frequently to public groups.
You grew up in what part of the world?
I grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Went to the University of Michigan for college, and then on to St. Louis for law school. And then I moved to California. I've been in California since then.
I'm getting a very big sense of you as entrepreneurship playing a part in your world. Is that ever a conscious or deliberate conversation in your own?
I think it just happens. It's not really something that I focus on, but it just tends to happen as I'm working on these projects. That role just kind of comes into play. So not really something that I think about, but it is part of what I do.
Right. I mean, to make all of this successful in each category, you really sometimes, I'm guessing, have to take a look at, okay, what skill am I excelling in here, and what skill do I need to really double down on?
I don't really think of it that way so much as I simply just sit down and do it, and then it just kind of emerges. But yes, that would be true. You have to try to focus on what you're doing.
So, how does someone like you self reflect or analyze strengths and, let's say, weaknesses?
Um, I don't have a lot of time to think about it, but I suppose in large part the reaction that I get from the public. For example, when they read my book, what do the reviewers say about them? Those kinds of things. That's what's helpful.
And what's the response like typically with a book, or especially this book?
It's been very good. I've got a lot of people, and I've kind of circulated this book through West Africa among some educators and so on. Some of them are adamant that it's a true story. They're trying to tell me, we know this is true. We heard something like this when we were little. This story sounds familiar. Where did you learn this, right? So they identify with it, and that's the goal, to get them to identify. And often the book, example, I wrote a book about Jesse Washington, which was that's the one called Because I'm Black. It was, I wrote that with Taiwo Fagbahungbi, who was a student of the Atlantic slave trade he's from that part of the world, West Africa. So we wrote that together. And the focus there was about a young boy who was 17 years old in 1916, Waco, Texas. He was accused of murdering the wife of the shareholder of the farm where he worked. When I looked at all of the evidence, including the trial transcript, I believe he was innocent. I believe that he was scapegoated for one thing, he was standing up to the white community at that time, which was a no-no in Waco, Texas. You just didn't do that if you were a black person. So he got onto the bad side of that group. And then this murder occurred and they wanted somebody to pin it on. And so they blamed him. But the real tragic part of it was not only the fact that he didn't have a fair trial. The trial lasted only an hour. The jury was out for 4 minutes. His own team did not any defense. His attorney only asked one question in the entire trial. So he was basically railroaded. The trial was a week from the event that occurred, but there were several things that made it very unlikely that he was the person that did it. For one thing, after she was killed around noon, he stayed in the field and continued plowing the field for the rest of the day. Well, when somebody kills somebody, they usually run. They don't stay there on the farm where it happened and just keep working. So that was one thing we looked at. He didn't have a fair opportunity to really express his view. He was told, first of all, he denied it, and then he was told that if he wanted to avoid his entire family being killed, he needed to confess and say that he did it. So he did do that. He went along with that, and then he realized that they weren't going to spare him in any way, shape, or form. But the way they killed him was brutal. After he was convicted by the jury, the mob grabbed him. 15,000 people in Waco, Texas. They cut off his fingers, cut off his toes, cut off his genitals. They hung him upside down, threw oil on him, and they roasted him alive for 2 hours. 15,000 people in Waco, Texas, were watching this whole event and cheering it on. And when you look at his confession, he couldn't read or write. He put an X on his confession. For one thing, he goes into detail about how he raped the woman that he supposedly killed. That's in the confession. Yet the doctors who examined the body said she wasn't raped. It didn't happen. So that in itself should have been a red flag to people that there's something wrong with this confession. It's not a true confession. And that was another red flag that they should have seen. But they didn't see it. The judge, everybody just kind of glossed over it, and they just made him the scapegoat, and then they brutalized him when they killed him. None of it was done legally.
So you wrote this story based on this person's recount of his life?
Well, he was dead, but other people went in and took, they went in and investigated everything. Elizabeth Bernstein, more recently did it. She looked at all of the evidence the way I did. She didn't write a novel about it. She wrote a book that just talked about what happened and how tragic this was. The president of Baylor University and some students at Baylor came out and supported him and said they believed he was innocent, but the court just rushed it through. You were supposed to have 30 days to prepare for a trial. He was given 1 week, and they lynched him on the day of the trial, which is 1 week after the murder occurred. And I don't believe he did it. I believe he was innocent.
I'm going back to your entertainment company, and I see that even something like that is very movie worthy.
It's important. It's important because people need to know about these things, and not for the purpose of causing people to be angry and that this happened. But again, just like information about Africa was suppressed throughout history, part of the Jim Crow era was suppressed in our country. You never read about these things in the history books when you were in high school. You never read about Jesse Washington. So these things we need to be aware of those things and stop trying to hide the fact that they occurred. It's the hiding of these things that causes so much trouble when people finally become aware of it. They feel betrayed. They feel like you kept this from us, and this was all part of our history that we never learned about. And it needs to come out. It really does need to come out.
You're certainly a vast knowledge of information. How do you determine what gets your attention for the topic of a book next when everything seemingly is fighting for, oh, this is important, this is important? How do you decide?
Well, I try to think of topics that I think would be of public interest, books that would have significant historical value, and I try to find a story within those events. For example, the Jewish boy I talked about. There's a noteworthy story there. Something that the public not only can learn about that part of history, but they can actually get a message, learn something that has a positive influence in the long range effect of it.
Let's talk about the publicity and the marketing, actually getting the book, which is, like I said at the top of the program, very, very important what you're writing about here on so many different levels. How does somebody like you handle the press, the publicity, and the marketing of such a story?
I usually let other people handle that part of it. I get a lot of calls from people that we want you to appear on this show or whatever the case may be, and then I'll do it if it looks like it's a good opportunity.
So you're somebody that uh enjoys a variety, it seems, of putting your best work out there and serving a variety of different people. Am I reading that right?
I would say so. I would say so. Yes. I've got one that'll be out not too distant future, involving a family that was in the Trail of Tears. The Native Americans who were brought to Oklahoma in the 1820s. Andrew Jackson's Indian Removal Act is what they called it. And so we're doing one on a family that was on the Trail of Tears and what they experienced along their way. And fortunately, there's been a lot of that recorded because a lot of people gave their history. They would tell their histories and what they experienced. So that's well documented in different families that went through that experience. So there's a source of information that, again, it's not been done. There's not really a major movie that talks specifically about someone that went through that. What really makes the book, I think, significant is that we try to focus on one person or one family instead of just looking at the big number and about statistics. We bring it down to this is what this person experienced as they went through the process, and then the public can identify with them better because they see it in the experience. It's like they live it with them. So that's what I try to do when I bring these things forward.
Your ninth book is In Search of the Golden Chalice, The Untold Story. That's available right now, as is your entire back catalog of books, all nine of them. Before we part, tell me about the movie aspect. When and where are those viewable?
Well, I've got the documentaries are viewable now. The documentaries again involve the descendants of people of the Holocaust. That's one of the documentaries. Another one involves what they call shaken baby syndrome. That's more of what happens if people get accused of shaking their baby, and often they're really innocent, but because of some genetic injury or genetic defect, the baby appears to have been injured in some type of child abuse. That's a common phenomenon. We're doing one about that.
Mhm.
Just different things along those lines. And then the other books, I've got one that is in it. I'm working with the producer. That is the one for the Holocaust boy that became a Jewish resistance fighter. That one is currently working with several different production companies. I haven't made a commitment as to where I'm going to go with that one, but that's the process that's happening there. They've all been made into screenplays and they're ready to go.
Well, that is really, really exciting. Extraordinary work you're doing. D.W. Duke, I want to thank you tremendously for doing what you're doing. I see the power, the relevancy, and the effect you're having on the global community at large. Really, really impressive work. Thank you for sitting down and joining the program today.
My pleasure. I enjoy being on your show, Josh.
And there you go. Thank you for sitting down for this episode of the Global Book Network. I am your host, Josh Carey. We'll see you soon.